I would like to start with a small quiz, so let's raise hands. Whom of you is thinking that Donald Trump is a great president? Who's thinking that he's a lousy president? Okay. South Africa, Mandela. Who thinks that Mandela did a great job for South Africa? Who thinks that he did a lousy job? Who thinks that Mother Teresa was a saint? Who think that her legacy is exaggerated? Okay. And now a completely different question. Whom of you ever met Trump, Mandela, or Teresa? Nobody. Isn't that strange? We know them. We all have an idea about them. We think they're lousy, they're great, they're a saint, and yet we never met them. Why is that? It's because of media. It's strange to realize that most of the things we know, almost everything we know it through media, through books, television, newspapers, the internet. It's the media bringing the world to us. And when media do their job like they should, they're the watchdogs of society. They scrutinize big companies. They hold politicians to account. They write about the behavior of powerful men, like they did in the Me Too. So that's the job they do. And yet, I didn't know if it ever occurred to you, media don't have power. We don't have formal powers. We cannot come into your houses. We cannot oblige you to give us an interview, oblige you to testify. We cannot send you to jail. We don't have warrants. And yet we have power, because media bring down CEOs. They bring down presidents. They can start revolutions like they did in the beginning of the Arab Spring. Or they can start genocides like they did in Rwanda. And they can influence our minds, the minds of the billions of people we, the media reach. Think about this one example. When there is a revolution in a country, what do the insurgents want to control in the first place? It's a television station, the radio station, the media. And in a dictatorship, in China, what does the Chinese government want to control? The internet. So maybe that is why somebody like Donald Trump says that journalists are the enemies of the people. That's maybe why the Philippine President Duterte is saying he wants to kill journalism. Maybe that's why one of the parties in the coalition government in Italy is saying that journalists are jackals and whores. And maybe, dramatically enough, that's why for the last 25 years, on average, 60 journalists are killed. So that's quite something. So, how come? How come, if we don't have these formal powers, that we are so influential? That's because you and me, we trust what's in the paper, what we see on television, what we hear on the radio, what we hear on the internet. Or don't we? Let's look at this Barometer. It's literally hanging above my bed in my apartment in Amsterdam. It's the trust barometer, how much people do trust media in the world. And here you can see that in our country, in Holland, 6 out of 10 people do trust journalism. It means that 4 out of 10 don't trust their media. In the United Kingdom, it's only 4 out of 10 people who do trust media. And in the United States, it's only 3 out of 10 people. 7 out of 10 do not trust the media. Why is it that they don't trust their media? There's lots of reasons for that. But basically it comes down to 2 things. People don't trust the media because they say media are not accurate and are biased. They're not accurate because they don't do fact-checking, they don't do investigative journalism, they don't correct their errors, they don't apologize for these errors. And they're biased, they're agenda-driven, they're financially driven, they're not balanced enough. So people don't trust media because they're not accurate and not balanced. Do I understand that people don't trust their media? I hate to say it, but yes, I understand it. I have been an editor now, a newspaper editor, for 20 years. But I understand that people don't trust the media. And just two examples of big stories. One story here in Europe, 2016, the referendum in the United Kingdom about the Brexit. Most of us, almost all of us, the media, predicted that the Brits would vote for a Remain. And as we know, they voted for Leave. And even a bigger story in the United States a couple of years ago. None of the big media ever believed that a certain Donald Trump could win the nomination of the Republican Party, let alone believing that he would become President of the United States. Apparently, we were not good enough. We didn't have our finger on the pulse of society. And of course, you could say, well, media are losing their credibility. That's bad for them, bad for you, not for me. If people don't trust your newspaper anymore, well, they will stop reading your newspaper, they will stop buying it. If they don't trust the television shows anymore, they will stop watching television shows. And in the end, the newspapers will disappear and the television shows will disappear. Well, bad for them. But if you think like that, you're really making a big, big, big mistake. Because I tell you, every society needs journalism. Every democracy needs journalism. And why is that? Because in every democracy, we need a minimal level of mutual trust. That's essential for our democracy. We need to trust more or less that our government is doing what it should do. We need to trust more or less that the judicial system in our country is working. We need to trust more or less that the tax system is fair, that the police system is fair. More or less, we need a level of mutual trust. And to have that trust, we need to know what's true and what's not true. We need to know if this politician is a good politician or not. We need to know if this judge is a crook or not. We need to know if this tax system is fair or not. And it's media who have to tell us. It's journalists who have to tell us if the difference between the truth, what's truth, and what's false. The difference between fact and fiction. The difference between news and fake news. Is that difficult? It's terribly difficult. It's very complex because the truth has lots of faces. It's very complex. But out there are enemies of the democracy and heralds of the untruth, the heralds of the fake news, and they don't want you to know the truth. There is political systems, there is companies, even tech companies, whose interest it could be not to inform you in a nuanced, decent way, but to feed you propaganda. 2 years ago, in January 2017, it struck me in a terrible way. You know, that was when Donald Trump was inaugurated, and his spokeswoman in the White House, Kellyanne Conway, she used for the first time the words, "You have facts and you have alternative facts." This was not Moscow, it was not Beijing, it was Washington. In the White House, you suddenly had facts and alternative facts. And what's worse, the enemies of the truth have more and more tools to develop their goals. You have machine learning, you have artificial intelligence, which blurs the lines between what's true and what's not true. You have algorithms, which keep you into your bubble. You have clickbait, which keeps you uninformed. And I'm convinced that we're only at the start of what is fake news. People predict we're entering an era now, which is not too far from now, in which technology allows us to manipulate everything, to manipulate text, video, sound, social media. When that happens, we cannot trust anymore what we hear, what we read, and what we see. That's quite scary, isn't it? That we're entering an era in which we cannot trust anymore what we read, what we hear, and what we see. And some people call this the apocalypse of our information system. It's called the infocalypse. the apocalypse of our information system. So what should we do to prevent that apocalypse, or at least to survive that apocalypse? To survive, maybe we cannot prevent it, but we can try to survive it. And to survive it, we have to turn ourselves again to journalism. In the next couple of years, maybe in the next couple of decades, journalism will become more important than ever in the history of humankind. We will turn ourselves to journalists to tell us what's true and what's not true, and all the complexities, the 50 shades of gray between true and not true. We will ask journalists to check the facts, to investigate and tell us the truth. In that world which is in completely confusion, in which we can't trust anymore what we see, what we read, what we hear, we want journalists to tell us the truth. But just a moment ago, I showed you the Barometer. We don't trust journalists anymore. But there's also good news. When we talk to, for example, in the United States, when we talk to the 70% of people who don't trust journalism anymore, and ask them, is there a chance that you could trust us again? That we could regain your trust? What should we do? Most of these people, most of these 70% say, definitely we can trust journalism again. Definitely we could come back and you could regain our trust. But then you have to do two things. And once again, then you have to be more accurate and you have to be less biased. So the solution is in better journalism. Journalism has to be more factual, more accurate, and less biased. We, the journalists, we have to do the fact-checking better, the investigative journalism better. We have to be more transparent. We have to correct our errors. We have to engage in dialogue with you. So we, in one sentence, we need to do better journalism. To survive that infocalypse, we don't have to look at Putin or at the Chinese leaders or at Trump. Journalists have to look at themselves. We have to do better journalism. But there is a crucial role in all this for you, the public. Because it's up to you to be the watchdogs of the watchdogs. You have to urge your journalism, your local papers, your national television, international media, you have to urge them to be better. You have to ask from them that their standards are higher. You have to tell them to correct their errors. You have to request them to have a higher quality of journalism. How can you do it? It's quite easy. Tell them. Mail them. Write them a letter. Criticize them on your social media. As I told you, I have been an editor for 20 years, almost daily, at least weekly. We get letters, mails, people criticizing us, and in this way changing the way we report, being more accurate, being less biased. It's the public telling us, that's your job, to control your journalism. Because, ladies and gentlemen, journalism is much too important to leave it to journalists. Journalism or media business is much too important to leave it to the media industry. I urge you to be vigilant. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this talk, it was not about journalism. It was all about democracy. Thank you very much.